Aaron, I'm ready.
All right.
Okay.
This is Aaron Riley interviewing Bud Limbert, Disc 2. Okay. All right. Which war did you serve in?
World War II, yeah.
Okay. Were you drafted or enlisted?
Enlisted. Yeah, I volunteered.
Okay.
In World War II, everywhere I went, I volunteered.
All right.
I was in Hawaii, Waikiki Beach, playing ball, and they got a chance to volunteer. I had a lot of experience in the war. When they started drafting, I was farming my dad's place. And I seen I was going to get drafted. Well, I'd had to borrow money and start a crop, and I couldn't afford to start a crop. And I knew that I'd have to, and there was nobody to leave it to. Daddy wasn't able to do nothing. There was nobody. So I wanted to since I was going to have to, or seen that I was going to, and I kind of wanted to go. I wanted to do. Why, then I volunteered before I was drafted.
Yeah.
I would have been drafted had I not, but before I started the crop, I volunteered in April. And that away when Daddy had a chance to rent his farm out to somebody else, because it's early enough that they still had time enough to get a loan and go ahead and farm. So, but anyhow, when I volunteered, why I had said I had a medical problem, said I had a hernia, so I was put in how did the Army term that? Can't think what term they used. But anyhow, whenever they examined me, Army examined me after I got enlisted, why I didn't have a medical problem. The hernia had taken care of itself. I had looked after it. In fact, I slipped on a log and fell off of that log and was supposed to give myself a hernia. So when I went to the doctor, though, he put a truss on me right then. I mean, it wasn't a day after that happened that he put a truss on me. And I wore that till he'd taken me off of it and said it was all right. But then when I turned it in, had my physical, why they sent me to the hospital to see if it needed anything done to it. And I got a clean slate from the medical hospital. I was in a medical hospital there in the Army for about 2 weeks. And when they did, but then I still got well, I can't remember what it was, what they called it, but they put me in limited service. And then when they put me in limited service, well, then I got in the medics. And when I went into the medics, why, I taken basic training, and then got in with a neurosurgical doctor when I taken special training, and got with a neurosurgical doctor and trained to be a neurosurgeon technician. And incidentally, the technician this doctor had with, he was a Polak neurosurgeon named Morosky. And he had, I was the 7th guy that he had selected. 6 of them, the 6 in front of me, had college educations. I just had high school education. And that put me on the low end of the totem pole. And I realized that. The only thing about it that I realized too early, that all the other boys that had college educations were city boys. I was a country boy, but I understood what the country life was and what you had to do to make things work for yourself. I had common sense, and I knew it. And another thing, when we were taking basic training, this stood out like a sore thumb. Is all of our calisthenics and all of the stuff was no problem for me. The other boys couldn't handle it. They just wasn't used to it. Now, I was a farm boy, and whenever I was farming, a lot of days I walked 27 miles plowing. And you say, well, how do you know you walked 27 miles? Well, our field that I usually plowed in was a quarter of a mile. And that morning I would plow 56 rows. That afternoon I would plow 54. And that is 110 quarters. And 110 quarters is 27 and a half miles. Or 27, I think. But anyhow, I plowed that a lot of times. So when we started taking basic training, I had a snap, and when a 25-mile hike, and it was done at night. 25-mile hike wasn't nothing for me. And another thing that was an advantage, and I knew it too, I was about 3 or 4 back from the front. I was pretty tall, you know what I mean, for then. And when we were marching, I was only about 2 or 3 or 4 back from the front. The boys on the tail end was like when you're trying to keep a convoy up, a car going to a funeral or something, and you're on the tail end. When you get slowed down, you got to do 60 and 70 to catch up with them at times. Well, I didn't have to do that. I could stay up because I was right behind the front one, see, it was set the pace. So I knew that. I didn't have no problems there. So, but then when we got taking training and stuff, well, then I realized that I had, you know, and when we'd have to reach, they'd send the rope back to you. You had to jump a lot of water, about 12 foot of water. That rope come back. Whenever I caught it, I'd bring it back away and take a run. See, you know what I mean? You couldn't just grab it and swing on out. I'd bring it back where I'd get a run and swing at it. And man, I'd jump the water like a top. Well, the boys that weren't used to that, they'd wind up, they wouldn't bring back the swing to it, and they'd wind up falling in the water. They, you know, couldn't make it. If they just used their head, they could make it. But I just kind of laugh and never say anything to them. Never. I said, if you all run backwards and then take a run at that, you'll make it easy. And climbing up all over the up rope nets and things like that, no problem. So, but anyhow, when it came to taking our basic training, well, I learned right then that if you just watch your P's and Q's, that I could survive in the Army. You know what I mean? But I had to work at it, and if I'd work at it, I could survive without any problems. So, but when we got to go to school and taking, in anything that we indulged in, lessons or anything like that, well, I had to pay closer attention to most of them. But when it come to the physical part, which everybody usually fell down on, I didn't. So when you take an overall, well, I stood a pretty good chance with anybody. And I knew that. Incidentally, one of the things that, this may not be the right place to bring it in, but I'd always went to church at Long Creek over there. And of course, just a little country church out there. Then when I got in the Army, I was taking basic in Abilene, Texas. Well, I went from going to church in Long Creek to the First Baptist Church of Abilene, Texas. And the first time I went to church, I knew that I had a uniform on that was looked just as good as anybody did. And I had pairs. I didn't wear my regular GI shoes. I had a pair of slippers that they let me keep in the Army. And but that was a kind of going from a church over there to the First Baptist Church of Abilene. When I first walked into the church, why, it looked so different, and I was almost afraid to continue. But when the usher of the church was very nice, they were used to soldiers. I mean, they didn't expect out of soldiers what they did out of there. And I realized that, you know what I mean? And people were awful friendly. So that got me started, but that set me up from everything. From then on, why, it was nothing that I wouldn't tackle. And come out, you know what I mean? I was just one of the people. I just realized that I could take them back to Long Creek, and they wouldn't know how to act in Long Creek Church either, you know. And then they had a recreational department down below in the basement of the church, and I got acquainted with them people. And so that set me up to be on my own and not feel like that I had a disadvantage of anybody. And so from then on, when we started training in the hospitals and things of that, well, I just paid close attention to what the doctor said and watched what the people did and everything. And I guess since I realized I didn't have the education that the other guys had, and I couldn't think. What I decided, by the way, that my problem was that they could outthink me, but they couldn't outdo me. So I paid very close attention, and that way, why, it was a snap to me to whatever we got into. Why, I felt like that I could do my part of it and wouldn't have to, you know, go out of my way to even do anything at any time. And it worked that way. But when I wanted to go somewhere, I went and never said nothing about it. All right? So it was then the doctor that I was with that was training us. He trained these 7 men in neurosurgical brain surgery. He trained us by himself to his liking. And he catered mostly to me on the ward and taking care of the patients. And I got neurosurgical training in handling the instruments. But I watched the medicine part of it too. So the instruments, I was always, we had the certain instruments we used. They did certain things, and that's all you had to know. You had to know which instruments you needed. But to me, that wasn't anything. Once you mastered that, what you had, you couldn't branch out, of course, and understand what was happening to the patient after he got on the ward. You know what I mean? What? Yeah. But I did that during the basic training in the hospital. I did basic training to be in the Army, but then also taking advanced training. Well, when we got in Hawaii, why, we were there, I was there about 2 months, I guess. And we were attached to this 233rd General Hospital, and they wouldn't send them in till, it was pretty well secure. You had to have a basic place to go to. And I wanted to get in the war. I wanted to get it over with. I wasn't doing nothing. So the doctor that I was with volunteered, but he could only handle 6 men. So he volunteered the 6 men that we had, one day and was left me out because he only had room for 6 now, and I didn't like that. So I volunteered myself. The next day and the following day, they assigned me unattached to the 96th Infantry. I was combat medical with the 96th Infantry, and the next day I was headed I didn't know I was going to the Philippines, but I'd headed to the Philippines to mop up, for a mop up. And I realized too that I was assigned unattached, and that wasn't the place to be. But then
What does that mean, unattached?
unattached, I wasn't part of the 96th. I was assigned unattached. So there was no place to gain anything, you know, to say, like I was a PFC then, private first class, and there was no one to give me any rank. See, I wasn't attached to them. There's no chance to gain any rank. And I had to make sure that I looked out for myself on that sense. So, but I went to the Philippines, and I don't know where the other boys in my outfit went, but when I went to the Philippines, I was down there about a month, mopping up in the jungles. I never seen a town. I was always in the jungles. And then when I went to Okinawa, why I went to Okinawa followed with the 96th and infantry. And when I got to Okinawa, why I was still attached to them. But we couldn't move there till because Okinawa, according to the way I see it now, back then I didn't understand, was altogether a different fight to what most of the people, soldiers, was used to. This was a mechanized fight, and I was right in the middle of mechanism. I mean, I sat right there. Well, this book that we have here, I watched first thing I seen when I went up topside. They told us to be up topside the next morning at 6 o'clock with everything you had in your barracks bag or on you, because you wouldn't be back on the ship anymore. And when the first thing I went upside was that I looked off to my left. I was to the ship, and incidentally, when I went up topside, I recognized all directions. We were facing east, beautiful Sunday morning, and on to my right was the south. On to my left, by the way, was the north, and behind me was the west. When I was facing east, the sun was coming up in the east, just as pretty as it could be. But I heard bombers, planes, and I looked off to my left up north, and there was these dive bombers. And I seen this go down, you know, and then he dropped, and seen him jump a little bit, by the way, and he headed back up. I said, oh, goodness, that man, he'd get shot with small arms fire, just a rifle. I could hit him. And that's the first time I realized that I was expendable. Everybody was expendable. I mean, you did what you needed to do. And and about the third one that went down, I thought, boy, I hope he don't get over here, man. There's ships all around me, you know what I mean, and being unloaded and everything, and I was just sitting up on my barracks bag, and I hope they don't get over here, you know. And of course, they were, I guess, 3/4 of a mile away from me, over half a mile away from me, where they was bombing. But as bombing the high point, what they were doing, they was ours. About the third one, I looked up to see, and I seen the star on the side. Well, that was ours. And I got to looking, and I looked south of me, by the way, and there was a carrier they was coming off of. About half a mile or so down through all the ships, I could see where they was coming off a carrier. But when I seen that was our ship, well, then, man, I felt better. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, about 10 o'clock, why, I went over the side, got in the little boat, and went to shore. When I got, there wasn't a bullet hit the water or hit this little boat I was on till I got to shore. It was about a half mile out in the ocean. But when I went to, but there wasn't a shot fired at this boat when I got, and I waded water about half knee deep, and got shore. And first thing I seen when I shore was a box. Well, a whole bunch of stuff was already on shore. And I looked, and there was clothes on the side of this, so I take cover behind these clothes because I know they wouldn't explode. You know what I mean? And then managed on up to got to an area where they was, we was going to take cover, and stayed there. But it was the ships was firing all over everything, firing everywhere, and that's what they had them pinned down. They had them pinned. That's why we didn't have nobody shooting at us going in. And the Japanese call that the typhoon of steel that first day, because the ships were shooting at the island as well as everything. And of course, air raids and everything was air raid was often. You'd see them there, and but you talk about a pretty sight. Every fifth bullet was tracers. The tracers is what they used to see where they're shooting at. And when anti-aircraft were shooting at the planes up there, that tracer, wherever it burst or at, well, that's where they're shooting it. Wherever it went, that's where they're shooting. And if they can tell how far they're missing the plane, or whatever they're shooting at, tell how far they're missing it. So, but then that I stayed there that day, but well, for about a week right there, and then my outfit, before we got moved out, it was so dense that you didn't move. You stayed where they told you to. And another thing, since I was assigned unattached, I made sure that somebody knew where I was at. I made sure I kept in touch with the officers of the 96th. But I was also asking questions, trying to find out, because I knew that my outfit that I had went with, trained under this doctor, was somewhere on the island or would be there. And since everything was conjugated right there in that one spot, that the spot that we went on, that he would come in on that side of the island where we was at, because they hit the other side too. And I kept looking, and about 3 or 4 days later, after I was there, we didn't move. We stayed right around in that area within a half a mile. Why, I found out where they were at, and he had got moved on the island. But so far as I know, they hadn't been sent to the Philippines like I was. I, of course, had to follow the 96th Infantry in the Philippines for me, but it was mopping up. It wasn't like invasion like we hit there. But the invasion that was there, why, it was all mechanical. What I would say by mechanical, most of the people had to march from place to place and stayed in foxholes and things in the early part of the war. This wasn't nothing like that. They didn't have time to dig foxholes, and the Navy covered it.
Where did you stay?
Huh?
So where were y'all at? What were you doing during that time?
What we were doing during the time? Trying to survive. We moved around in foxholes, but I never did dig a foxhole. Pitched a little old pup tent that we had in our packs, and just the first night I slept, or tried to, just laid on the ground, right close to some 155, or they were ground equipment, but they were shooting at the island, just like off of the island, just up on the edge of it. They were shooting across at targets 2 or 3 miles from where we were at. And in other words, I knew that if there was any protection at all, that the anti-aircraft, and it was a anti-aircraft about 4 or 5 guns within about 100 yards of where I was laying, and it was anti-aircraft, so they could protect from the bombers coming, Betty bombers. That's what they was using on us, was and it was a air raid, man. The air raids was, and actually the bombers, you could see them, but they hardly ever got as far as where we were at, because to crossing that area where the ocean was, why they had to cross by all these ships. And incidentally, I read in a paper after that there was about 1,400 ships taking part in that the first day. So it was ships everywhere, you know. And of course that's what the Betty bombers were after. But there was so much anti-aircraft going up at them that they were high. Most of you'd see them, woo, were high. So.
About how many Japanese planes were in the air?
Oh, at times it was probably, most I ever seen was a dozen, but mostly it's just 3 or 4. And they'd come in, what they were after was the ships, and they'd come in dispersed. They wouldn't come in together because they're too easy to hit. And one would come in over here and one would come in over there, and maybe from different directions. And of course those Japs, they knew the area, they knew right where they were at. And see, everybody was underground over there. They was all down in caves. There wasn't nobody on the top side. That's why we didn't get shot at, because all that ship was firing just like they were more firing at other ships. They were firing at the island. And when they kept them pinned down to where they couldn't get out. And incidentally, you can't fight from underground. I realized that right on the start. It's just like ants coming up out of a hole. They have all got to come to that hole to get out, and once they get out, they have got to observe what's up top side, or they don't know what's up there. So they couldn't fight underground. But then you couldn't get up there to get them out once they come out. In other words, you shoot one that come out, there's another right behind him. So in other words, this general, our General Buckner, after we was there for quite a while, I talked to him. In fact, I mean, I was once I got with my outfit, I had been trained in quite a bit of instrument neurosurgical work. In other words, I could handle instruments just like the other guys. I could handle them, but since I didn't have the education, they put me on the ward. I was ward master of the ward, and so whenever I needed, I went to the operating room. I know I've listened to the air raids, have turn out lights, and I held a 5-cell flashlight in one hand and a suction machine in the other, to cleaning out where we was operating. You know what I mean? When they'd have an air raid, you turned out all the lights, and we operated with a 5-cell flashlight. And you just had a little hole about like that going through. Brain surgery is not like any other surgery. And you do not put a guy out with brain surgery. All you do is just Novocaine the scalp. Once you go through the scalp, you don't need anything else. Usually you want him to talk to you all the time you operate on him. If he can talk, if he's alert enough to talk, you want to keep him talking, keep him awake, keep him alert all the time you're talking to him.
Does the brain have no feeling?
Brain doesn't have any feeling. No. And the thing about it is, on the brain, you do not take anything out of it. Say like a bullet has went through the skull, burst the skull. And if it has damaged the brain with, let's put it this way, a jelly-like mass, you don't suction that stuff out. You do, if it's anything loose in there, you try to get it out. But if it's not loose, you don't try to tear it out, or we did. And you just repair what you can, and then when you get to most of the stuff is a concussion. In other words, you got a blood vessel that has broke and bleeding inside, and you know what I mean, causing the pressure to get on the nerve, and it's we had a chart up on the wall of everything where your nerves went to from this chart, and you could follow through at X-ray, look at the X-ray, and see where the shrapnel or whatever it was, concussion or anything that had went through the skull, and follow on your chart and see where those nerves ended at in the part of the brain, and you knew, and then of course it's going to be paralyzed somewhere. So, but you could follow them right down to where he'd be paralyzed at, because it's just like following a blood vessel. If you follow it right on down, and you knew where. Mm-hmm. And the thing about it was, these guys that be on the ward, and after they'd be in there a while, and I'd be pinching. You know what I mean? I'd looked on a chart. You could look at the X-ray and tell where the bullet entered, and then you could follow your chart up there and see where those nerves, you know, where they ended at, just like your little blood vessels, and where those nerves entered at, you could pinch the guy, you know, around close to that. Mm-hmm. Hey, what are you doing? I said, I'm saying where your nerve ended, and tell whether that nerve was still being affected or not, and what would affect it. And I learned this, and I never did say nothing to the other boys. Oh, yeah, I did to the doctor one time. And I talked to Borowski, and I said, on these boys that we've got, after we keep them in the ward a while, do you want me to make a chart, a note of what was happening? He said, Leo, we don't have time for that. I need you to keep up with everything. But he said, even if we did, they wouldn't recognize what we wrote. We don't have no place to send it to, no one to collect it. And he said they would just throw it out, and you really don't have time. And he said, I haven't really got time to read it, because he's just going from one operation to the other, just one operation to the other. In 3 months, we did 278 major operations besides the little stuff. But now we just dealt with brain surgery altogether. But whenever I explained to the guys, you know, why I'd be pinching him, and I'd say to him, I said, see up yonder on a chart? And I said, see where your head at? Yeah. But he said, look at them nerves there now. Follow them right down here. And they'd get interested in even in themselves. You know what I mean? Because they'd understand where they at and what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And what would happen to them. And if it was swelling, now if there's swelling and it start pressing on a nerve, you could follow that nerve right down there and tell where there's swelling, or if a blood vessel was bleeding in there and putting pressure on it, you could follow it down and tell that. But now if you started getting a temperature with all this stuff, you had infection starting up. And that wouldn't start till about a day or two after you got them in the ward. But then you could, you'd know whether that their problem was infection or whether their problem was hematoma or something forming inside there, or swelling.
How close was this, was your hospital unit to where they were fighting?
This was for front line. We were front line 10.
Right on
Yeah.
the front line.
Yeah. Now, somewheres I've got a Argosy magazine. Now, Robert Hibbard or Warren Sitney, I don't know, I was no warning him then, written, it was a thing written by my doctor that we had over there. I was a frontline neurosurgeon. And see, they was bumming and going on all the time. We had to turn the lights out. It didn't make any difference. and this 5-cell flashlight we kept handy to.
How many would they bring in at a time?
Well, we could only handle one at a time, but we had a collection tent that where everybody was brought to, and then the doctor that admitted them into the tent called where they needed to go, where they needed to go to the medical, or where they needed to go to operating room here, or where they need to go to near surgical operating, or if they had say a shrapnel wound somewhere and they needed to go to the medical doctors, then he'd state the preference, what needed to be done first, and that's where we'd go. There was one guy that he was hollering all the time. He was just out of his head. And so he had head wound, and he was saying, hollering and this, that, and the other, saying different things. And when Morosky, they brought him to us, and when he heard Morosky say, "Well, take him to X-ray first. We got to know where it's at," and that fellow started hollering X-ray, X-ray, and he just kept hollering all the time. And when he hollered X-ray, well, we named him X-ray. And by the way, old X-ray made it. He made it.
How many of them did? What was the percentage of them that didn't make it?
Uh,
That they sent to you guys.
I don't. Now, once they sent us to us, I don't remember one or two, by the way, that didn't make it. Once they sent them to us. Now, I don't know how far they got, but they went through us, and they were in shape that we sent them to the medical hospital that was a ship, hospital ship. In other words,
Did they do that triage where if they thought they were too badly wounded, they did not send them to you?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
They did that.
Yeah.
So if they
Oh,
thought
yeah,
were
they
too
did that.
badly wounded, you
That's
didn't
a
send them.
hard thing to do. I walked in there and look and tell who you needed to and who you had to pass up. That's a hard thing to do.
So you just, if you couldn't help,
You figured you couldn't help them, and somebody that you could help, well, you knew that you could help and stood. Well, then you had to separate them.
Yeah. So that was the reason you all didn't have that many to die, was because.
Well,
once they were
because,
gonna
yeah.
die, you didn't see them.
We didn't see them. They died. A lot of them died. We just couldn't handle them. And the thing about it is, once we got a hold of them, we got the pressure off, and the swelling that would cause them to or the temperature come up, infection. Why, once you could keep your swelling or the infection down, you didn't have any problems with them. The only thing we had over there was sulfa drugs and penicillin. And there is one thing that we did that you would never think about it, and the doctors would laugh at you if I told them, but it worked. It worked, and that was keeping infection out of the sores, out of the incisions on your scalp. And the only way, the things that we used, and it worked, was about an inch square little strips of just cloth, what I mean, bandage cloth, and Vaseline. Put it in autoclave, sterilize it, cut it in little strips, put it in a wide mouth jar, sterilize it, and then add sterilized tips. Whenever the patient come out of the operating room into their ward, well, then you just lay that over it and just lay layers of it to hold anything back out of the incision. And what it done, it was sterile, and it was put on there thick enough that no dirt or anything would go through that Vaseline. And when it did, then when you picked it off, it did not stick to the sore. You'd put it on there enough that nothing could get through it. And about 2 days, your scalp is, in other words, it's ready to take the sutures and stuff out.
Was it loud? Was it bombing? Was it loud where you were working?
Oh yeah, shoot, all the shooting and everything. It was even those guns that 105s and 155 houses that was on the land were shooting across, angling across the island. See, this island of Okinawa was 60 miles long. It was 4 miles wide in the narrowest place, and it was 12 miles wide in the widest place. That was just, and the north end of it was so rough, so it was only about 35 miles of it that all this stuff taking place in. I was constantly under fire all the time, till the last month and a half. Yeah. But then during the first of it, well, of course, now we wasn't operating the first 2 or 3 days. I wasn't with them. I was just doing nothing, you might say, trying to survive. Just because that you're on the island, all these guns that shoot up this shells and things, they burst up there. Some of them don't. If they don't, they make a weird sound and they're dangerous coming back down. But all this stuff was raining just like hail down there. You know, back, it comes down. Everything is shot up there comes back down. All shells and everything. They just explode up there. And of course the bombs come down too. But bombs, you can tell way a bomb at it. Honestly, I was more afraid of a lightning when you get an electrical storm here, you know, all that cracking lightning. I was more afraid of it than I was bombs or anything. You just don't pay any attention to them. It's all in a day's work. You don't run, you don't do nothing.
You just got where you were just used to it.
You're just used to it. You don't pay attention to it. And it about 3 days, they would start a push. About 3 days, it'd be nothing but constant shooting. And the atmosphere would get all tore up, cloudy, and start raining. And when it start raining for about 2 or 3 days, then the army, the enemy and us too, pull up all your reinforcements and get everything, and then when it quits raining, they start another push. In about 3 days, then it was. So you'd fight about 3 days, then rest about 3 days. But, so, now let's see.
I
No.
asked all of them, just if you've done the basic training, but get
Like-
any of those, like,
He's already
yeah.
talked
ask
about,
them,
like,
all
start
of
with
us.
this.
I mean, start with like number 40.
All right.
Okay.
Were there many casualties in your unit? Like,
Where was that?
Some medics, yeah, some of the people that worked in there.
Not in the medical part of people that worked there, because of the fact that we were in a kind of a cove, and the ships were a lot of ships was all around us. Well, not all around us, but on the south side of us, really. But the north of us was mountainous area. And the thing that I thought about was when they got to a parallel, a certain line on the island, right north of us, they would take the civilians, the ones that were prisoners, that were taken prisoners, and once they got to pass that line, they would turn them loose. You're on your own. And you thought, well, why'd they do that for? Well, now, it was well guarded. Once we crossed, this line was well guarded. They couldn't come back. They didn't have any, they knew that the prisoners didn't have anything to come, no guns or nothing to shoot with. They could have, going north, they could have went off the island, but there's nobody to go pick them up. No one wanted them. Japan didn't want them. They was about 400 miles from them. And there's nobody on the island going to go around there and pick them up and bring them back. They didn't want them. And they had to be fed. The only thing that we had soldiers up there for, to keep, if there's any Japanese soldiers up there, we didn't want them killing the civilians. And he kept them up there to keep the civilians from fighting amongst themselves or anything. You know, of course, everybody went there. We found some of the soldiers that was taken captive would gotten in with the civilians and things that you went up there too, because once you get them past that panel, just stripped them down, give them their clothes and what they had, but they didn't have anything to eat either.
Did they ever bring any? Did you ever have to work on any civilians that were wounded?
No, but they did. We never did work on any civilians that were wounded. No, I seen it. But now I passed by. I know one morning we were moving, and this was all later in the time, and a bunch of civilians were been hurt. They were casualties, and this old fella was laying there on a stretcher. There was a quart jar of water sitting over here, and he was laying over here on a stretcher, and his right or left arm was off, and it was gangrene. I could see green. And I pulled out a formation, grabbed that water, carried it right over where he could reach his other arm and get to it. And of course I was hollered, "Soldier, get back in rank." But the guy that was, marching, he never said any more. He had to say something. But he said, "Soldier, get back in rank." But he never said any other word, because he wanted me to do that to begin with, because that was just humane. Because I said it close enough that the poor old fella could get it, but he was old man. And it just stretches all the way down through there.
Is that right?
Yeah. But then they were, no way. There was awesome people trying to minister to them, want to help them, but then no way they could help. So, but one other thing I want to say, when I volunteered over there when I was in Oahu on the Hawaiian Islands. Now the outfit that we were assigned to, they stayed there and played ball while I went to the Philippines and while I went to Okinawa, and done all that, and they got all the rank. Whenever rank come up, they had to make all the rank. They got everything done. Guys that played ball, now they come once they got on the island there, of course, it's about time it was secured. Once they moved that hospital in, well, they all sergeants, staff sergeants and everything. I got all rank. I wound up a T5 because I had no, and incidentally, this outfit I was with, we got some sergeants and things. There's 7 men that I was with, but I was low end of the totem pole, and I wasn't with them all the time, so I didn't get nothing for going down in the Philippines. But what I seen, I rode 5 different ships. I rode LST. First ship I rode was a regular carrier from Seattle to Oahu. Was a regular ship that carried passengers. This was a passenger line. We had a swimming pool and everything on the ship, but it had war materials down in it. And that ship, it was a fast ship. But then whenever I got to the Hawaiian Islands, and whenever I left the Hawaiian Islands, I rode the LST. Was one of the ships that Hesse was on. He rode, was on a LST, Calvin did, and helped transfer soldiers, see. So I rode one of those ships. And then when I got to Guam, I got on another APA ship that it was different from LST, but it was a landing ship, and rode it to the Philippines. And when I rode it, that was the 3rd ship. So when I rode it to the Philippines, and we just out in the jungles, It parked out there and strung up a rope, and we rode this little boat into where we could get into a littler boat, to where we could get into the beach, and then they had a rope strung up, and we waded water, and held your rifle up above your head. I waded water from up to my chest, getting into a rope, and just went up on the beach. And it wasn't no town or no nothing there. And then when I went from there, from the Philippines to Okinawa, I rode this converted ship that had been a oil tanker and stuff, but it had converted to hauling equipment and ammunition and stuff. So I rode it to Okinawa. And then when I left Okinawa, I rode a aircraft carrier. And incidentally, they said they just pushed the planes off the ocean to make room for us when we left. See, the war was over. So I rode an aircraft carrier 6,000 miles back to Seattle. So I rode 5 different ships. And I spent 90 days at sea. And I wound up with 3 battle stars, and of course all the ribbons, you know, good conduct medal and all that. But I got 3 battle stars for all those campaigns. And but I wound up at T5. And I didn't get it till it was time to get out of the Army, because there's nobody. I wasn't in a position to get any rank. I was just positioned to work.
How'd you keep in touch with your family?
Huh?
How'd you keep in touch with your family?
Oh, through writing. Just it was little military notes, is what you'd call it, and everything was censored. And I wrote about every other. Well, no, probably about twice to 3 times a week, because there was so much mail going out that you didn't. Well, I didn't feel like that I ought to, you know, ought to keep up, but then I didn't feel like it, because everybody needed to write, and we didn't have it. That, well, you knew, I knew in reason this was the end of the war. Well, I knew it was. Oh, I didn't finish up here. What? I was walking down through the area, and this General Buckner that got killed on Okinawa, he was coming along there. You didn't snoot him anything, because if you saluted him, you told him that was an officer, see. So all you had to do just walk up to him and start. You recognized him by talking. Called him General,
so they
sir.
didn't wear a uniform that showed that they were generals.
They didn't know. All they had was the bars on. You had to be close to see the bars. See, yeah. And I'd walk to him, and General Buckner, I'd talk to him 3 or 4 times, because me being in that ward there, once they got there, why then he came to see the soldiers, and we were walking there. I guess I had to walk a couple 100 yards, and he asked me. Well, he always, every time I seen him, he asked me how many children I had, you know, but he always assured me and said, "We're going home." Said, "They're no match for us." Said, "We're going to have to dig them out. We're going to lose a lot of men. You're going to have to dig them out like rats." But said, "They're no more match for us." Said, "They ain't got nothing." Said, we got our supply line already hooked up." Said, and said, every time they use supplies, they ain't got anything else to replace it with. They don't have, and they couldn't get it here if they had it. But anyhow, he'd always assure me that we're going home, that we're going to win this, we're going home. And then he'd walk down through the ward and talk to but he eventually got killed over there. But I always liked to talk to him, and he was just as common as anybody. He was just a common soldier. That's all he was, yeah. But he was smart.
What was his name?
Buckner, General Buckner, yep. So,
Okay.
now, incidentally, well, maybe another question in there. I might get hit now. But
Go ahead,
just keep going.
If it is, we'll ask it later.
now, Little May had to go back home to her uncle and the aunt and grandma that raised her, and that's where she went whenever I went to the army. She went back home, and Ann, let's see, was a year old. Yeah, was a year old when I went to the army, and I had been. I come home on furlough, and little baby got pregnant, and I was 7 months before I seen Edward. Edward was 7 months old before I seen him. But Grandma Shelton had cancer of the breast. Back then, you couldn't take care of that, and she just loved to hold them little kids. And of course, Edward died with cancer. Ann died with cancer. And I've always felt that had I been here, could have kept them away a whole lot, that probably things would have been better, would have been a lot different. But I figured that was contributed, a lot of that was contributed to it, because you couldn't take care of them things back then. And so, but then, there was no place else for them to go. They couldn't stay with my daddy. And Daddy moved to Grubbs, bought him a little house over there, and rented his farm out back across the bay where I was raised. Yeah. So that about ended the war situation and take care of course, I got in trucking and.
Well, we're not through with the war yet, so
Okay.
ask me your other, ask them all of them.
All right.
All right. What was the food like?
Huh?
What was the food like?
While you were on the island.
Oh,
in
the
Okinawa,
food-
what did you eat?
Oh, we ate canned goods, corn, beans, and stuff. And now our main thing was what I relied on was sea rations. Now, sea ration is a little chocolate bar, about 3/4 of an inch thick. It's about 3 inches wide and about 4 inches long. Now, during the typhoon, see, I went through a typhoon over there that winds, surged to 150 mile an hour. The regular force of it was 125. It blew ships up on the land, and you never could get them down. They just cut them up. You couldn't get them off of the land. And turned ships over, you know what I mean, and just tore up everything. And I survived it mostly by myself when it's blowed the tents and everything down. And I got ever see a picture of the tombs, Okinawan tombs? I got behind the fence there for a while. It was so bad. In a tomb, and even crawled inside the tomb for a while, but finally got back out. And what really saved me, you couldn't stand up. Whenever at 150 mile an hour wind, you can't stand up, you can't walk in it. And of course the rain and everything. And laid behind this wall about this high, concrete wall, and that was around this tomb. The tomb was now they're buried, they just like a cremate. They take all that, they got, we call them urns, but they're vases, just like you put flowers in with lids on them. And all the bones and everything is put in this vase. The older people is up the top. They got stair steps. They're just like steps. You go inside the house or something, start here at the bottom and go up there about 7, 8 steps. And then it's just a round thing with just in under the ground, but it comes down here and about this high off of the ground is the entrance of it. And then these steps, and the older people, like 2 old people that is, they in real nice urns at the top. And from the steps up is about 3 or 4 feet right out here, and just a concrete wall with it in, and you got this door's open here, and I just crawled in there and got right behind that wall where that wind and stuff wouldn't, blowing in right on you, and let it rain. And then been there with them. Of course, you know, all these, it was, I guess in that one I was in, there was two nice ones, fancy ones up the top. They were about this about 18 inches tall, and about like this right here. And then they had these little round urns that was cheaper. They were kind of like Indians would build these things, kind of like flower vases, and they stood up about 18 inches or so. And but they were bigger and littler, you know what I mean. They went on down. But what I was going to say is that we had what you call ponchos, and I had a cap, a hat like it that would turn water, and this poncho you could pull drawstrings, and it had arms. Well, the arm, it was just like a flat piece of canvas, and it had snaps on it, and you just lay it out just like a piece of canvas like this. But if you want to make it, then you can snap these snaps and run your arms to it. It just like kind of like a bat, you know, out like that. Well, and so when I seen that everything was during this typhoon, that everything was getting blowed down, and I had a whole bunch of sea rations. And I filled my fatigues up with sea rations, and I had a canteen, and I knew that I was going to get one of those if I didn't figure it out that before. If we ever had a typhoon over there, that I need to get to them. So what I did, laid down, crawled into the entrance of it, and got behind this wall here, and undone this poncho, and laid down with, I had a barracks bag and stuff with me because everything else was gone. And laid down and right up against that wall there from the side that the wind was coming from, and spread this poncho out all over, done it tight right here and pulled that up and just went there and just hunkered right down in there and just kind of laid over on my barracks bag. And stayed there for, I don't know, it got dark, and there was nowhere to go. I guess I don't remember whether I was there a day and a night or how long I was there. But then finally, when it began to let up, then I began to look for other places where there was still activity, but it wasn't very much activity anywhere. Because the thing about it is, I could not get out. And nobody else, I had my rifle and everything with me, but nobody else could get to me either. Because if they, you know what I mean, it was just nothing moving.
What happened to the hospital during that time?
There wasn't no hospital. Hospital wasn't there then.
Okay, wasn't there then.
No. The tent got laid down where the other operation was, but this happened right after we got over there. Not very long, and it wasn't anything set up. But now everything when we left Okinawa, when the war was over, and when I come home, there was not a person that lived on Okinawa could live on Okinawa. Not a civilian. Now there were civilians there that worked with the Army and worked for the Army, but they were put up by the Army. There wasn't a civilian house that was fit to live in. There was nothing. They had nothing. See now, Japan, about 4 years before we hit there, in the 39s, Okinawa, the Uruka group, didn't have an army. They didn't have an army. They depended on being nice people to them. And Japan just went in there and taken them over. Moved in all the Japanese there, and they left some Okinawans in charge to make it look good, but the Okinawans didn't have nothing to say about running the country, so they just taken them over. And Okinawa had about 400,000 people. And when the war was over, they was down to 200,000. Over 200,000 Okinawans got killed during the war. And then Japan moved in there and replaced it with Japanese, and they owned the island, and we went in there and rebuilt it for them. and then they were the ones that bombed Pearl Harbor to start it. And I don't know whether a lot of people know it, but Jimmy Doolittle won the war. Jimmy Doolittle was a pilot. And the way he won the war, I say he won the war, was he got a crew together right after they bombed Pearl Harbor. We didn't have nothing. We didn't have any ships. We didn't have nothing. And he figured out a way to bomb Tokyo. And all of the American people, including me, but I was downhearted. I mean, that we'd lost all of our ships. We didn't have anything. We couldn't fly that far. We didn't have planes that fly that far. We still had our planes, but we didn't have planes that would fly that far with fuel, no way to fuel them. So he got a crew together, and they went so far by ship, they had just enough fuel to get them to Japan. They couldn't fuel from where they left the ships. They didn't have enough fuel to get back to the ships. But those boys left the ships, and he said 30 minutes over Tokyo, and they bombed Tokyo. And when they bombed Tokyo, that brought every American, everyone, by the way, to do their best to win the war. Now, they let, to me, I didn't know it. We couldn't do it again because those boys that went over there, they had to parachute out if their planes got shot down, or they had to try to land somewhere in some country that could, in other words, they could survive in, that would be friendly to them. And it was only a few places that they could go, and it's according to how much fuel they had. But that 30 minutes over Tokyo, and that just knocked the Japanese people plumb out. They have bummed us. They have bummed us already. And even the emperor over there. Now, that is one thing whenever I was looking at the island on Okinawa, I went in there with the idea, when I realized those planes were expendable, that I seen them die bombing, that I was expendable too, because there wasn't a person on the island was friendly to me. And the Japanese were suicide. Everybody was suicide. So we had to fight to survive. It didn't make any difference where it is. Now, this sounds harsh, but if you see a 10-year-old boy out there with a grenade in his hand, with a firing pin in his mouth, shoot him. Then, he cannot turn that grenade loose without it hurting somebody, himself or somebody else. It's going to get you. If you don't, and he's going to throw it to you. And if he throws it to you and it gets you, you're not going to help nobody anyhow. And you do not want my kids, my family, or nobody over there in a place like that was, facing that thing now. And the thing about it is, you're going to fight your best to make sure that they do not get over here and tear up our place like we was tearing up that, because we had to tear it up. But it wasn't a place on that island that nobody could go back to. They couldn't move in there because there was nothing for nobody. No, they couldn't even stay at home. There wasn't no homes, wasn't nothing. And when they did, the people had moved in there. If they'd moved shiploads in there, they didn't have nothing to eat, nowhere to buy anything to eat. Oh, incidentally, I went 6 months without a payroll, not a dollar. I got a $10 emergency payroll while I was when the Okinawa was secured and the war was over, I could not spend one dime of it. There wasn't a thing to buy. Nothing. But I went 6 months without a payroll. I couldn't have bought anything with it anyhow. But then when I got the payroll, boy, I was tickled to death. Going to get a paycheck. And there wasn't a thing in the world I didn't spend that $10 on nothing. So that's how desolate you, whenever you get to a place like that. Now the boys that are over there in Iraq right now, they need to stay there. They need to stay there. Keep that over there. It'll be a 9/11 here. Just as soon as all boys come home, there'll be 9/11 every night. Because those people over there are trained to kill. They're not happy unless they kill it. That's part of the Islam theory. They're not happy unless they're killing. In fact, that's the way they go to heaven, is killing. Kill somebody, kill a Christian or kill a Jew. And it's now the fortunate thing about it, we have a small percentage of the earth's people that are of that faith. But the ones that are of that faith, and that's what we're fighting. And so we'll have a 9/11 every night. And now on Okinawa, when I first landed on Okinawa, the first night that I slept in under those, I had a cocked rifle on this side. Well, it's just on safety. I had my bayonet out of my rifle, had a towel wrapped around it right above where it goes on the rifle. It's got a hump there that keep your hand from sliding off of it. You know what it is, keeps it from sliding down on the rifle. But I had that towel wrapped around that bayonet. That was a knife. Because if you got in the first quarters, close quarters, somebody got on the outside of your tent or right close to you, you stabbed him. You didn't shoot him. Shoot him gives your position away. Shoot him, you're liable to hit somebody else or cause someone else thinking it's the enemy to shoot you that really didn't understand. But a knife is quiet, and that's what that was. And I slept night after night after night, and never take my clothes off, never take my helmet off, never take nothing. Just lay on the ground, cover yourself with the tent, with your poncho, which was the tent, or you did have a little tent that you could put up. But then and I don't want to sleep that way over here anymore. And I lay down at night, I could sleep. But if our boys was home, and all those that followed them over here, because they'll follow them, and we've got them right here just waiting. But then I could not lay down and sleep without me a rifle and a knife, especially a knife, even here in America. But now I sleep and never worry about it. But when they come home, I'll worry about it.
Was there something you kept for good luck?
Huh?
Was there something you kept special for good
Kept,
luck?
well,
Like
somewhere,
object?
yeah, I got a Japanese bayonet that I have kept. Offhand, I don't know where it's at right now, but I've kept it for the same reason that I relied on my bayonet to get me through. Because if there was shell or anything hit you, shrapnel or bomb or anything, you couldn't control that. But if there was a person close enough that you could stab him, that was up to you to figure out how to get by. And I figured that bayonet, with a towel wrapped around it, or that one that I got, the Japanese bayonet, that it was my source of staying alive and not being detected. And if it was a bunch, if it was 2 or 3 Japs along there, and you stabbed one of them, if they were scared, you know what I mean, or on ahead of him, they'd never realize he wasn't with them. And if he wasn't, they'd never realize where he got away from them, where they missed him at. He might have left them somewhere else. So it'd be quiet, and it was effective too.
Okay. Did you ever get to go on leave?
Yeah. When I shipped overseas, And I left Texas. Yeah. Well, I came home. I believe for a week. I'm not sure.